That's my dodgy Python code pulling this CSV out of the fit files, and it's not quite aligning the timestamps perfectly, but you get the idea. I'm not using the DC Analyzer Rainmaker tool or whatever it's called because I'm tight and it's $29 a year.
So hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now I hope you can hear me and see me all right today. The weather is absolutely minging, as you can see from the spray. Power meters are complicated things. There are many ways to skin a cat, as it were. Do you measure pure torque at the crank, at the spider, or do you measure normal force going down on the pedal and then multiply by the crank length to get the torque and then times by the cadence? Many ways to do it. We've been, for the last 10-15 years, trying to make power meters pretty indestructible. Do you seal the electronics with a non-replaceable battery, or do you have a battery door and use a replaceable battery? Do you risk, if you have moving parts in the system like a pedal, do you risk the system going out of calibration due to bearing wear? Do you have a rider weight limit, or quite a low rider weight limit if it's a pedal? Now historically, these are the kind of things, there's a rainbow over there. Historically, these are the kind of things that make power meters kind of complicated, quite complex and quite sensitive, because at the end of the day, there's some very sensitive, finely calibrated strain gauge electronics in most power meters. And I would say you need some level of mechanical sympathy to have a power meter on your bike and not to break it, especially if it's an off-road one. And that's why I think, although this power meter is off-road, being SPD based, so gravel, mountain bike or CX, it's actually a step improvement for all power meters across the board because of one word: durability. Before we kind of look at the website specs and the kind of boring stuff that you can just read on Favero's website, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the geeky stuff. And as you can see from these shots, the body is absolutely battered. Some of you commented and saying, why is Pete Talk wearing those brown gravel shoes? Well, now you know. I've been testing this SPD based power meter for a long time. Last year my kilometers were actually pretty low, but my hours on the bike were one of the highest in the last 5 years. And that's because the majority of it was done on the mountain bike or the gravel bike. So whilst other things have failed, dissolved, broken apart and needed servicing, these pedals haven't missed a beat, even though they've been absolutely battered. And I actually crashed one of them so hard it bent the binding. More on that later, because I actually did the power meter comparison test after that. I've ridden them in the Alps, I've ridden up the Galibier with them, I've ridden on gravel, I've ridden them on mountain bike, I've even ridden them on my old Santa Cruz High Tower, which you're not supposed to do because they're not actually rated for gravity riding, but they survived. Now the first thing to mention about this power meter, which I think really makes it a bit of a game changer, is there's no pod, there's no external electronics at all. Obviously aiding to its durability off-road. A pod would just get absolutely smashed. Fully sealed internal electronics. The axle, and Favero actually tell you this, is 17.4 pH. Now that is super hard steel, so it's not going to get worn by the bearings which are inside the body. We'll talk about those bearings in a minute because they're very important. And it means for that kind of hardness, which I reckon is about 40 Rockwell C, the yield strength of that axle is going to be over about 1200 megapascal, so that's seriously strong, which is why they can hollow out the inside of the axle, put the battery, the wireless electronics and the strain gauges inside there. And yeah, you pretty much don't need to worry about breaking these, although they're technically not rated for sort of enduro, XC, anything like that. Gnarly XC will be absolutely fine. Favero have sort of contracted their own binding system. The clip-in tension, the clip-out tension by the default spring setting exactly the same, but they've gone for a case hardened coating on the binding of 800 Vickers hardness. Now that might not mean anything to you, but that's about 62 Rockwell C, which is insanely hard. So again, they've really gone for longevity. That's harder than what Shimano use on their standard pedals, I believe. You could not machine that metal, so it's a case hardening treatment put on the bindings afterwards. But you can replace the pedal body in these power meters without affecting the calibration, and you're looking at only 60 euros to replace the whole body. Whereas other power meters, I think Garmin Rally is about 200 euros for a pedal body, and the SRMX Power is 200 or 300 euros. I think it's 275 euros to replace the body. So this is fully serviceable. If you need new bearings, you might as well just replace the whole body, because it's got 2 needle roller bearings inside that pedal body. Now, the use of needle roller bearings is very clever because of the packaging constraints. Now, I'm not talking about the box it comes in, I'm talking about the amount of space in the architecture of the axle and keeping the stack height down to about 11 mil, which is only 2 millimeters more than a Shimano pedal. They've gone for needle roller bearings too inside the body. Now, needle roller bearings have a large line contact to distribute the load, and the dynamic load rating of the needle rollers they're using is 400 kg each. But the downside to having needle rollers, unlike an angular contact bearing you might find in a normal Shimano pedal, like a road pedal, you can't take out any kind of radial play. And there is a tiny bit of radial play. It's much less than a bushing, and obviously it's much stronger than a bushing, but there is a tiny bit of radial play. And I'll drop in a clip here of me actually measuring that radial play on a micrometer. Now, they've reduced it as much as possible by making the outer race needle roller quite a hard press fit to reduce that radial play. It is something you're going to get with needle roller bearings, and there's not a lot you can do about it. But once you're on the bike, it's imperceivable. You cannot feel it. But if you buy these, don't be surprised if you can feel the tiniest bit of play. Once you're on the bike, through the shoe, it's imperceivable. I mean, it's orders of magnitude less than the play you're going to get in your cleat anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it. But it does give a much higher load rating for still a very small stack height. So it's only 2 mil higher than an XTR, or 2.5 mil higher than an XTR, and about 2 mil higher than an XT. Right, now, quick note about the battery. Favero are saying you get about 60 hours per pedal. Now, I've actually been getting quite a lot more than that, which is impressive. I think I've got up to 100 hours, but that's absolute minimum. I guess it depends on the temperature and the baseline draw of the battery. You may have worries about, oh, I'd rather have a replaceable battery because I'm worried about battery degradation. Well, if you think about, to degrade a battery by about 10%, you need to charge it around 500 cycles. Now, you ain't charging these for 500 cycles before your cycling career is probably done. So don't worry about battery degradation. It's not a thing when you don't need to charge it, when you hardly need to charge it. If it's a phone, you're charging it every night, then yeah, you need to worry about your lithium battery a little bit, or your Tesla, of course. So everything in this power meter is sealed and hermetic. There's no battery door, there's no contact pins like you get with the Garmin Rally. Infamously dodgy, the O-ring and the pin contacts can get corroded, even with a little bit of moisture can start corroding things. And the strain gauges are on inside of the axle, on the kind of inner diameter of the axle. So unlike an SRM, X-Power, they put the gauges on the outside of the axle, and then they need to drill through holes through the axle for the wires. And the only kind of pass-through ingress in this pedal are the kind of see-through LED cap on right at the end of the axle, which is obviously potted in, or plastic welded in, so it's waterproof. And then the gold frit pins, well, I call them frit pins, but they're not frit pins, the gold contact pad for the charger. And obviously they're gold so they don't corrode, it's completely inert. So zero issues with water ingress. Right, in a minute I'm going to let the brakes off and actually enjoy this ride. But we'll wrap it up with some data indoors. Now, the other really impressive thing is the weight. So a pair of XT pedals is 342 grams, 380 grams or 382. So you're getting all that functionality of a power meter, which I believe is the most important thing if you're trying to get good at cycling. Forget wheels, forget frames, forget like skin suits, get a power meter first. 40 grams for the added functionality of a really durable go anywhere power meter. So if you're bike touring, mountain biking, gravel ride, XC or even road, I believe this is a step improvement in power meter, especially in durability and usability. Now, being a Favero, or you know, following from the Assioma, it has all the cycling dynamic stuff which you might expect from a pedal power meter. So, you know, phase angle, torque efficiency, left-right balance, all that stuff. And that's true left-right balance. And obviously spider-based power meters are not true left-right balance. But this one is, I think, the first Favero unit to actually have pedal center offset in the app and on the Garmin. So you can see basically your effective Q factor, how outboard or inboard you're pressing down with the pedals. And personally, I don't read too much into it. It is what it is. Like, if I'm comfortable on the bike and my right PCO is pretty wide, I know it's always been like that. And the other thing is I run obviously big shoes, so I have to run them quite far. So, you know, the width of my hips, I have childbirthing hips, so I naturally have a very large Q factor. So I always have a very positive PCO on both sides. The price, again, I think that's pretty damn competitive for the level of engineering that you're getting in here. Finally, I want to talk about how cadence is measured. So obviously power is a product of torque times speed. Measuring torque is done by the strain gauges, and that's only half the equation. You have to accurately measure rotational speed or angular velocity to accurately predict power or accurately measure power. Now, a lot of power meters, especially the cheaper ones, still only use basically averaged angular velocity. So they don't pick up changes in angular velocity in one revolution. And that's something that Favero, and especially the Assiomas, have always done really well, is they have an instantaneous angular velocity reading. So I want to talk about the peanut. So when you're pedaling, you might be pedaling at 90 RPM, but if you take 1 RPM, one of those cycles, one of those revolutions, the speed of your foot is not constant throughout that revolution. And this is especially bad if you're outdoors and climbing or sprinting up steep gradients or at lower cadences. And if you've ever been on a watt bike or any kind of bike fitting jig, you'll notice that your cadence graph or even your power graph is essentially a peanut shape. And that's because it's not constant throughout the circle. So your angular velocity, your RPM, actually changes throughout the circle. And if your power meter can't pick that up, it takes an average, and a lot of power meters will overread because they don't take into account the slight dips or troughs, peaks and troughs in the angular velocity measurement. Now, I wanted Favero to give me some more data about this, some more proof. So they sent me some experimental data, which is really cool, which basically shows predicted kind of power meter error based upon the variation of angular velocity. So if you've got so if I'm doing this, like up a really steep climb, I've got a very peaky angular velocity through the pedal stroke. And then the more variable that angular velocity is, the higher the calculated power error is going to be. And we'll talk about this indoors when we look at power results from this versus the cork on very short, steep, kind of peaky, standing, lowish cadence efforts. And I think it highlights quite a lot of error, whereas this is a gyro reading many times a second. It's going to take a bit more research to figure out if that cork is the same as a modern cork, because you can't put two spider power meters on the same bike. Let me actually ride my bike and enjoy it now, because I have to go really slowly when I'm talking to the camera, because the wind noise or the camera just bounces around too much. But yeah, it's been a nice Saturday morning. It's finally stopped raining, but I'm covered in spray, as you can see. Leave a link down below. It's a direct link to the page. There's no affiliation with it. I'm not taking any commission. I just think I really care about the engineering. I met them at Eurobike, spoke to the CEO even, and he's all about reliability, decent customer service, and not ripping you off if you need to replace parts.
Now we're back in the warm. I've got a couple of data sets to show you. One is on the mountain bike with the Power 2 Max, and one is on the road bike with the cork. Now the road bike one was literally done last week, but the Power 2 Max one was actually done last year. They've not seen any of this data before this video has gone live, and that is a testament to how confident they are in their product. Before we go into this mountain bike data set, that I actually had pretty bad crash last year, and you may have seen this on the Pete Talk Instagram, that I bust my knee open quite badly. I had about 6 weeks off the bike. Probably should have had more because I had quite a lot of tendonitis afterwards. But basically, I was riding the pedals. There was a root sticking out the trail. I caught my pedal in it. The bike stopped dead. I went over the bars. The bike scorpioned up behind me, and my foot didn't come unclipped because it was a freak accident. There was no twisting action of the foot. It was purely kind of up and down. And I did think probably that serious impact could have knocked the strain gauges in the axle, maybe out of calibration, out of kilter, might have damaged something. Anyway, seriously interesting to see that after one of the first ride back, after injury, I did this power meter comparison, and no problems whatsoever. As you can see, the total ride average, this was almost a 2-hour ride. You can see almost like 6,500 seconds along the bottom or something. They're pretty much bang on. Now, this was off-road, gravel climb, fire road, and a set number of intervals. So let me just put my pen on, and you can see here there's 4 intervals, and you can see here there's 4 intervals. Now, these ones are seated. These ones are standing. Now, I did that to try and catch the power meter out, because when you stand up out of the saddle, first of all, the torque is a lot more peaky, it's a lot more spiky. The cadence throughout one rev is not constant. It's a lot more spiky again than when you're seated, and it tends to catch power meters out a little bit. And also when you're leaning the bike over, if your force vector down on the pedal is anything not normal, i.e. 90 degrees, it could possibly change the strain on the strain gauge somehow. So I always do seated and standing intervals. So let's have a zoom in on this mountain bike data set first of all. So these are all the seated intervals. You can see here in tabular form along the top. Yeah, all within 1%. Apart from this last one here, which is a bit odd. The power meter of the Favero was slightly low than the power meter on the Power 2 Max. I think that's probably something to do with cadence sensing because I couldn't replicate that. And if we look at the standing intervals, they're a lot more well aligned, which is odd because I would expect the 2 power meters to line up in standing intervals. I would expect it to be a lot harder, but they're all within 1% of each other. Clearly, if we're looking at absolute terms, I don't actually know which one's right. Clearly, very, very similar. Showcasing the prawn watts here, 7 minutes, 410, even there with all those spiky efforts. And you can see on this last one, if we zoom in further, this is the last standing interval. Give it Billy Big Bollocks at the start. Oh shit, slowly dying. Okay, power meters, the average power is too low. Need to build it back up again towards the end. Give it everything. Poof, die at the end. Now you may notice there is a slight kind of 3 to 4 second lag in these signals. Now that's not the power meter's fault. That's my dodgy Python code pulling this CSV out of the fit files, and it's not quite aligning the timestamps perfectly, but you get the idea. I'm not using the DC Analyzer Rainmaker tool or whatever it's called because I'm tight and it's $29 a year. I'm sure it's very good, but by doing it yourself, it's a bit of Excel practice. And yeah, you can pull out other stuff from the Excel if you want to. There's quite a lot going on in the fit files for the MX pedal because it contains a lot of the cycling dynamic stuff. So there's pedal center offset, and that's logged every second. If you set your Garmin to 1 hertz, not smart, it logs everything at 1 second. So the offset, torque effectiveness, all that stuff, the phase angle and all that stuff you can get from these, which you can't get from spider-based power meters. Now let's look at the road side. So the road side was done a lot more recently. Actually, just last week I did this test, and this was a coach's worst nightmare. This is a completely random road ride, just a kind of normal zone 2-ish hour on the bike. As you can see, there's about 3,600 seconds along the bottom. Power meter differences here within 0.5%. Very, very good. So I'm happy that my Quark, my pedals, the MX pedals, and my Power 2 Max generally are within 0.5%, and that's really, really good. And this is why I would consider this as my go-to power meter, as I consider my Quark has been my venerable reference over the last 6 or 7 years. However, we'll come on to this in a minute. I think these sense cadence much better than the old spider-based power meters because these are measuring many more times. Let's look at the quick warm-up. So the warm-up was about 10 minutes. Yeah, 600 seconds, 10 minutes. Again, within 0.5%. So that's 1 watt in 200. That's 0.5%. Very, very good. No dropouts. These, we've gone back a page. Technology error right happening. Okay, back to the warm-up. These, what look like dropouts aren't. These are junctions. Okay, so this is just me stopping, waiting at set traffic lights, then getting a going again. And yeah, you can see even with those kind of weird, this is why I don't do it on an indoor trainer. First of all, the indoor trainer reference is not very accurate, I believe. It's more of a fudge figure than a true wattage figure. And also, it depends what trainer you're using and how hot it is and what how that varies with time. I prefer to do everything outdoors because I think it's a lot easier to catch power meters outdoors because your pedaling is not so constant, it's spikier. There are other things going on like vibrations coming into the electronics. You've got the self-heating of the electronics in the power meter as they warm up, and then the air cooling from the bike as it's going through the air. So there's a lot more factors outdoors, and I think it's harder for a power meter to do well when you're comparing them outdoors than it is on an indoor trainer doing it erg mode where it's very consistent. Now zooming in again, willy waving the prawn watts, sort of 1200 watt sprint for 20 seconds. That shift again in the time signal because I haven't aligned the timestamps properly. Yeah, this is pretty ghetto. But anyway, exactly the same transient behavior in both, picking up the same kind of signals, even this kind of little holy shit this hurts kind of transient during the increase or the build up to full thrust, and then dying off pretty quickly because I'm completely crap at sprinting. Lat force, steady seated effort, 250 watt was the target, and you can see again well within 0.5% here. Follow exactly the same trend, picking up similar sort of transients. Can't really say anything about that. The Quark obviously is in blue if you're colorblind. Now, a spiky standard and seating effort, throwing in all sorts of random efforts into my training plan, which isn't a training plan, which is completely made up, and then I call it something afterwards on Strava to make myself look educated. This is just sporadic, semi kind of thrashing up a hill. There's actually a 2% difference in this one, and I haven't come down to why that is, because the transients look exactly the same. The area under the graph looks exactly the same. because I can do integration in my head by looking at charts. And yeah, I don't know, but about 2% variance here. It might be something to do with the spiky efforts getting up and sitting down. I can't say which one's right or wrong. Now, the last effort, which is completely random, because I'm going up a hill here quite hard and then stopping to turn right up another hill, but waiting for traffic to come past. So completely down to 0, and then boof, I'm hitting it up to 600-700 watts again. Yeah, there's a little bit of difference in there, but as you do these really short laps, you're going to expect to get a larger error with a shorter lap, because when you start pedaling again, one power meter will start reading quicker than the other, depending on like what time through that 1 hertz, that 1 second period it starts to log. One could be slightly offset from the other. One cadence sensing in one unit is slightly different from the other. The Pro MX probably picks up a start in cadence quicker than the Cork does, but that's all conjecture. I just think the pedals measure cadence more accurately than the old Cork, but that's just speculation. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this. And like I said, Favero haven't asked me to put anything in or leave anything out. They haven't seen this data. I genuinely believe these are one of the best products I've tested on the bike formally ever, because a lot of things have perished on my gravel bike and my mountain bike since I started testing these, and these have just been absolutely faultless, apart from that crash where I bent the binding, but that was enough to give me serious knee problems for 8 weeks. Yeah, I genuinely can't fault them. Continuously impressed by Favero for what they can give at the price. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.